I did not stick to my June TBR like at all. I don't think I read one book on my June TBR. Maybe I read one or two. I don't even remember what was actually in my June TBR. A quick little disclaimer about that because I feel like I'm all over the place with my books this month. One of the first books that I read in June was Practice Makes Perfect by Sarah Adams. Another thing is that every month I have a little note page on my phone with all the books that I read that month. And when I finish a book, I normally go into the note app and type in like all of my thoughts on the books, the ratings that I gave it, all of that good stuff. For some reason, my June notes on all the books that I read this month completely disappeared. So I'm going to try my best to remember what these books are about and what I thought about them, because some of the books might be a blur for me. So bear with me. But one of the first books that I read in June was Practice Makes Perfect by Sarah Adams. I do remember this book and I remember that I did not enjoy it whatsoever. This is the second book in the When in Rome series. It actually takes place in the same small town as When in Rome did. It just follows two different sets of main characters, but the main characters from When in Rome are mentioned heavily in this book, like heavily. Even though you can technically read this as a standalone book, I would definitely suggest reading When in Rome first so you can really get the small town vibes and meet all the characters. Also, I think that When in Rome was 10 times better than Practice Makes Perfect, so that's just my personal opinion. I definitely recommend When in Rome over Practice Makes Perfect. This one follows Annie Walker. You actually met her in When in Rome. She's this really shy small town girl. She hasn't really gone on any adventures. She hasn't left her small town. She basically does what everyone expects her to do. Like, she's the town's angel, and then enters this bodyguard who is the complete opposite of Annie. His name is Will, and he hates small towns. He's all about adventures. He doesn't want to be tied down. He doesn't like dating. He actually doesn't believe in love. He's a huge commitment phobe. Even though they're opposites, somehow they end up getting along and become deeply attracted to one another. So it's very much opposites attract, but I just didn't like it. I felt like this book was trying really hard to be spicy, even though it's labeled as a closed door romance. And normally I like reading Sarah Adams books because she does the closed door romance so well. I really needed a break from spicy books in June, so I really thought that I was going to like this one, and it just felt so flat. It was so dull. I didn't really care for any of the characters. I mean, no, let me correct that. I didn't care about the main characters. I didn't really buy their chemistry. I did like the side characters because all the side characters are basically the same as When in Rome, so I have no issues with them. I just felt like the two main characters were incredibly dull and I just didn't like them together. I didn't really buy their romance or anything. I wasn't really rooting for them at the end, and I was just waiting for this book to be over. So definitely not my fave book that I read in June. I think I gave this book a 2 out of 5 stars, and it makes me so sad because, like I mentioned earlier, I really did enjoy When in Rome, but this one was just a no for me. Let me know in the comments below if you read this book and if you like it more than When in Rome. I feel like I've only seen people say they hate this book. I haven't really seen anyone say that they loved it or that they loved it more than When in Rome. So I'm curious to know if you read this book and what were your thoughts on it, because yeah, it just wasn't for me. I did read The Summer of Broken Rules by K.L. Walther. This one follows a character named Meredith. Before I started reading this book, I actually thought it was going to be a adult romance, and it actually turned out to be YA. The main character, I think she's 18 years old or 17 going on 18. I don't remember correctly, but I know that she's young. And she basically goes to Martha's Vineyard with her family to celebrate one of her cousins getting married. But this is the first time her and her family are going back to Martha's Vineyard after her sister passed away. So it's a very emotional time for them. To make matters worse, Meredith's boyfriend broke up with her right before she left to this trip. So she's basically all over the place. And her family has this game that they play every single summer when they're at Martha's Vineyard, and it's called Assassin, and it's so much fun. I absolutely love this book so much. Like I said, I went into it thinking it was going to be an adult romance, but it actually turned out to be YA, and it really didn't feel YA to me. It really was just a really cute, heartwarming book. It deals with a lot of grief, learning to trust other people again, learning to trust yourself, learning to put yourself first. Overall, it's just a really, really good book. I loved every second reading this book. If you're looking for a book with all the summer summer vibe, then definitely pick this one up and read it. I don't know why it took me so long to read this book, but I'm mad at myself that it took me so long to read it because I enjoyed it so much. I gave it a 4 out of 5 stars. It honestly was almost a 5-star read for me, and the assassin game sounds like a freaking blast. I wish I could play that in real life. I feel like it would be so fun. I also really like the family vibes in this book. In this book, there's a big family, and the big family comes together and is there for one another. Despite being a huge family, they still are there for one another, and they show up for each other, and they help each other grieve, and they help each other move on. I just really liked everything about this book. I can't really remember what I didn't like, to be honest. So yeah, 4 out of 5 stars. I definitely recommend. This is a great book to read in the summertime. Another book that I read was the Happy Ever After playlist by Abby Jimenez. So this is my second Abby Jimenez book. I read Part of Your World last month, really enjoyed it, so I had super high expectations for this one. I know this is a second book in a series. I didn't read the first book because honestly, the first book has gotten so many bad reviews, and I've just seen people shit on the main characters in that book, so I really don't feel like picking it up. Maybe one day I will, but for now, I'm good. This one follows Sloane, who from my understanding is actually introduced in the first book. This book takes place 2 years after Sloane loses her husband. She basically finds this dog, or the dog finds her. She puts up flyers. She tries to contact the dog's owner, but no one reaches back out. So Sloane is basically like, okay, well, you're my dog now. And the dog basically helps Sloane get out of her depression for 2 years. She's basically been grieving the death of her husband, and she hasn't really lived. She lost her passion for life, basically. This dog literally helps her get out of bed, helps her go on runs and on walks every single day, and she's making an effort to regain control of her life and to move on from the death of her husband. But a couple of weeks go by, the dog's owner actually ends up reaching out to Sloane and basically says like, hey, I want my dog back. I've just been on tour, so I missed all your voicemails, all your messages. I'm sorry, but please give me my dog back. Sloane is kind of hesitant because by this point, she's already become attached to the dog, and she doesn't really trust the dog's owner, whose name is Jason. I forgot his name. So she basically starts to talk to Jason every single day. Through them talking every single day, they start to have feelings for one another, and then they end up meeting. The first half of the book is really nice because it's basically Sloane moving past the death of her husband and learning to love life again and learning to let other people in again. And then the second half is more of a drama-filled plot between Jason and Sloane. So it's like the first half is heavy but lighthearted, and then the second half is a little bit more dramatic just to keep the plot interesting. And I really like that. I like that the book wasn't just Sloane moving on or moving past the death of her husband. Like, she moved past the death of her husband in the first half, and then the second half was focused on other things, which made the book seem super interesting. I didn't want to put this book down. I really enjoyed it. I highly recommend that if you haven't read this book, definitely pick it up and check it out. I think this is one that a lot of people will enjoy. It has a little bit of everything, and I also think this is a great book to read in the summer simply because it's a great book to take with you to the beach or to the pool, because trust me, you're not going to want to put this book down. And also the dog is just absolutely adorable. He's definitely my favorite character in this book because dogs are just amazing. The next book that I read is one that I'm very disappointed about, and I honestly think I'm disappointed because I should have DNF'd this book. I don't know why I forced myself to read it. I think I just wasn't in the mood for it. Had I DNF'd it and maybe gone back to it in the future, I feel like I would have probably enjoyed it. I don't know. I just struggled to get into the storyline, and I forced myself to keep reading, and I ended up not really liking it. And the book is Twisted Games by Anna Huang. So this is the second book in the Twisted series. This one follows Reese and Bridget. We actually meet both characters in the first Twisted Games book. I absolutely love Bridget. I think she was so fun, and she's actually a princess, a literal princess, and I loved everything about her character. She was very sassy, she was very strong, independent, but I felt like Reese was too similar to Alex from the first book. Was that his name? I think that was his name. Yeah, his name was definitely Alex. I felt like Reese was too similar to Alex from the first book, and they both were huge grumps. They both both were overprotective, very territorial towards both women in the books. And I don't know, I'm kind of tired of the grumpy trope, of the over possessive trope as well. I feel like I'm in need of a break from spicy books, just because I feel like they all have been sounding the same to me, and they all have just been a little bit cringy, actually a lot cringy, and I just didn't really vibe with the spiciness in this book. I didn't really like Reese. I didn't hate him. I feel like he's a lot better than Alex, because Alex low-key was a psychopath, but I still just didn't really buy Reese and Bridget's relationship. I don't know, I just didn't really like it. If you're unfamiliar with this book, basically Reese is Bridget's bodyguard, so it is a bodyguard trope, a romance book, and they can't be together. It's forbidden love. Bridget is a little princess, so she literally can't have feelings for Reese. He's forbidden for her, yet they still are attracted to one another, and that's very obvious from the very first page. They're also very different from one another, so it's kind of like opposites attract, polar opposites. Normally I like those tropes, but in this book it just fell flat to me. And again, I just really wasn't vibing with Reese. I do love the name Reese. Every time I saw his name, I thought back to the A Court of Thorns and Roses series, and it was making me want to read that series and DNF this book, but I powered through and I ended up not liking it, but I think that's on me. I feel like if I would have been in the mood for it, I probably would have enjoyed it, because I really did enjoy Bridget's character and I felt like the storyline was entertaining. So I ended up giving it a 3 out of 5 stars. I would recommend this book though, because so many of you guys do love it, and if you like the tropes that are in this book, I feel like you'll really enjoy it. It just wasn't for me based on the mood that I was in while reading it, if that makes sense. I did have a reread this month. I found myself in a huge book slump after I finished Twisted Games. I really didn't know what I was in the mood for, so I went back to one of my all-time favorite books and decided to reread it. I actually read it for another vlog that will probably be coming soon. I read Beach Read Again by Emily Henry, and when I first read this book, you guys, I gave it 5 stars, and I'm giving it 5 stars again because I think that this book is absolutely perfection. I loved every single second of this book. I literally have 0 complaints about the main characters. Augustus has my heart for absolutely ever, and he's one of my favorite book boyfriends of all time. Like, he's absolutely perfect. Love him so much. So if you're unfamiliar with Beach Read, which if you've been watching my channel for a while and you haven't read this book yet, I'm kind of offended because I've recommended this book so many times and you just need to read it at this point. But this book follows 2 authors, January Jones and Augustus Everett. They're both in the same small town during the summertime, and they're both facing writer's block. To help each other get past their writer's block, they decide to swap their book genres. Augustus will write a romance novel and January will write a literary fiction novel. And it's such a cute little summer read. This is another perfect book to take with you to the beach and to read in one sitting. Everything about this was amazing, and it's not only focused on the romance, it's also focuses a lot on January getting past some family issues that she has. It talks about life and finding yourself again after losing yourself, falling in love with life again, falling in love with self, falling in love with someone else. This book is absolutely perfection. So like I said, if you haven't read this yet, go read it. 5 stars once again. And then I did end up DNFing a book, so I'm going to mention it. However, I just don't think I was in the mood for this book, so I am going to go back into it. And I don't have anything against the book. I don't think I was in the mood for it, but I did read like the first 100 pages of it, I think. I don't even know where I left off. I did start Glass Sword by Victoria Aveyard. So this is the 2nd book in the Red Queen series. I really did enjoy the first book, Red Queen, so I do want to finish up this series. Like I said, I just don't think I was in the mood for this one. This is a fantasy series and it follows a main character named Mare. This book basically involves 2 different types of society. Society is divided between the Red Bloods and then the Silver Bloods. All her life, Mare, the main character, has thought of herself to be Red Blood, and the Red Bloods are basically the slaves to the Silvers because the Silvers have these magical abilities, so they're a lot more powerful and they look down on the Red Bloods. But in a strange twist of fate, Mare discovers that she's actually Silver and that she actually has her own magical power. So it follows her journey on basically rebelling against the Silvers and trying to gain back control of her life and the rest of the Red Bloods. So it's a really good fantasy series. Again, I just don't think I was in the mood for this one, so I did end up DNFing it. I didn't want what happened with Twisted Games to happen to me again with the Glass Sword. So since I knew I wasn't in the mood for it, I was like, you know what, I'm just going to DNF it and then I'll circle back to it eventually. The next book that I read was another 5-star read for me, and I read it after I read Twisted Games, and it was such a good like palate cleanser for me, and it definitely made me get out of my book slump because it was so freaking funny and so good. The book was Royally Rearranged, and I gave this book a 5-star rating. It was so cute. It's such a cute little romantic comedy. The main characters were just so lovable. It basically follows a princess who is supposed to marry her childhood best friend in this arranged marriage situation. However, her best friend has never known about this arrangement, so when he finds out, he's completely against it. He's like, I'm not going to be forced into an arranged marriage. That's not what I want. I don't want to marry this girl. And of course, upon learning that, the main character, Serafina, is absolutely crushed. She has to marry someone in 2 months. She won't be able to become queen if she doesn't marry someone of a title. And because of this, another character named Rav, who is absolutely perfection, he has my whole heart, he proposes to fake date Serafina to make her childhood best friend jealous. Be like, hey, you should be jealous, marry her because you know that you're in love with her, so you should marry her. And his character is just so perfect, and I really like that this book, even though this book is a romantic comedy, it still deals with a lot of deep topics. And I really like that the author made the male main character have anxiety and panic attacks, low-key PTSD, because I feel like when it comes to mental health and men, it's not really talked about nearly enough as it should be. So I really appreciate anytime an author makes their male main character have some sort of mental health illness like anxiety, because I feel like it breaks down the stigma a little bit. And I just loved everything about his character. I also really love Serafina's character. She really had a lot of character growth in this book, and I was not expecting to really enjoy this book. I thought that at best this book was going to be a 3-star read for me because it was free on the Kindle App Store, which is the only reason I downloaded it, but it actually turned out to be a great read. And it's also a closed-door romance, which, like I said earlier, I'm in need of a break from spicy books, and this was a great book to read. So if you are looking for a good closed-door romance, definitely read this book. I feel like you'll really enjoy it. Such a cute book. I loved it. I was literally smiling as I was reading the book. It was so beautifully written, and the author is Emma St. Clair, I believe, and I guess she only writes closed-door romances if I'm not mistaken. So I'm definitely going to pick up her other books because I just fell in love with her writing. And there's a second book in this series, so this is actually the first book in a whole series. So I'm definitely going to pick up the second book because, like I said, I just fell in love with her writing. And I did end up reading a thriller this month. I also read this book on the Kindle app on my phone. The book is called The Last Flight by Julie Clark. So this is a very short thriller. I think it's only like 270 pages. It's a very short thriller. It was a very quick read. I actually finished this in 1 day. It started off really good. So the premise is basically that two women meet in an airport and they decide to swap identities because both women are running away from their lives. One woman running away from an abusive husband. The second woman is running away from something or someone in her life. Not really sure what she's running away from until you start reading the book, so I'm not going to spoil it for you guys, but just know that both women need to disappear. So they meet in this airport. One woman is set off to fly to Puerto Rico, which was actually one of the reasons why I downloaded the book, because I'm from Puerto Rico. I saw Puerto Rico in the synopsis and I was like, you know what, I'm going to read this book. But one of them is set to go off to Puerto Rico, the other is set to go to California. Again, they decide to swap identities, but the plane going to Puerto Rico ends up crashing. One of the characters, Claire, who was supposed to go to Puerto Rico, ends up going to California and taking the identity of the other woman. But since the other woman was also running away from her life, Claire is left to figure out who this person really was. I thought it was a pretty good thriller. Started off really good, like the premise and the synopsis sounded amazing, and the first couple chapters were really entertaining, and then it kind of got dull for me in the middle. I feel like there wasn't much substance in the middle part of the book, and I kind of was just getting a little bored with it. And then it started to pick up again towards the end, but I feel like the ending was a little bit predictable. So for that reason, I only gave it a 3 out of 5 stars, but I do think it's a pretty good thriller and I would recommend it. And I really enjoyed the author's writing. If she has any other books, I'll probably end up picking up more of her books because her writing wasn't bad. I just, again, like I said, I just was a little bored halfway through it. But that is pretty much all the books that I read in June. Overall, I feel like it was a pretty good reading month for me. I didn't read a ton of books and there were some misses in this pile, but I did find a new 5-star read, so that's always a good time. That's always the goal when reading books. I feel like it was a pretty successful reading month. I'm excited to see what I end up reading in July. Let me know in the comments below what you read in June. Did you have any 5-star reads this month? I would love to know. And that's pretty much it for today's video. If you enjoyed watching this video, don't forget to give it a big thumbs up. Don't forget to subscribe. I would love to have you a part of my channel, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Bye guys.